Welcome back to the Old Soul Millennial channel. In today's video, I'd like to show you how I install wood Faux blinds. Now, I purchased these blinds from Lowe's. These are 2.5-inch blinds made by Bali. They're quite expensive, and I'd like to show you my method because, you know, when you're ordering these wood Faux blinds, there's so many different measurements that you have to cue in, projections, returns, extension brackets. You know, I'm a simple carpenter. I understand a few of these terms, but it gets very confusing. They don't really lay out the information really clear. Kind of complicated for the average Joe to order these blinds and get them to fit properly. So throughout this video, I'm just going to share with you what's been going through my head, where I got these measurements from, and hopefully it will help somebody out there. Now, first thing I want to clear the air of pronunciation. I believe it's pronounced wood faux blinds, F-A-U-X, but I'm going to call them wood Faux blinds because it sounds a little bit better. As mentioned a moment ago, I'm a simple carpenter. I'm not a blinds installation professional. However, I found that there's a lack of information online for the installation of these blinds and measurements and this and that. So I just figured I'd make this video and hopefully it'll help somebody out. So first things first, I got 2.5-inch blinds. The industry standard, I believe, is 2-inch blinds. And when I say 2.5-inch, I'm talking about the width of the louvers. Now, the nice thing about 2.5-inch blinds is they allow a greater viewing area. So, you know, when you look out the window, you're going to be able to see more. As opposed to the 2-inch, you know, they're going to be spaced a little bit closer together, so it's going to somewhat obstruct your view. The only disadvantage of a 2.5-inch louver is, of course, they're going to stick off the window a little bit further. I'd rather have the viewing area. Next thing I'd like to cover is when you're ordering these blinds, you have to figure out what mounting option you want to go with. You could do an inside mount, or you can do an outside mount. Now, I believe inside mount is preferred. I think they're a lot easier to install. The only problem for me is my window casings weren't deep enough to allow for an inside mount. So my only other option was to do an outside mount, which means that the blind's mechanism has to sit outside of the window casing area. In terms of mounting for an outside mount blind system, you could mount them directly onto the trim. However, I did not want to mount them on the trim for two reasons. For one, you know, when you're shooting this trim into the wall, it's normally just held on with finish nails, so it's not really strong. You put a 20-pound blind onto this trim, and you don't brace up this trim, add some additional fasteners, you run the risk of it pulling out. So I didn't want to mount directly onto the trim. Another thing to think about as well, if your blinds are able to retract, you know, if you have your mechanism sitting on top of your trim right here, when you retract your blinds, they're not going to fully clear the window. Thus, you're going to reduce some of your visibility. So what I've elected to do, you can see I've already done it on a few windows, is to attach the blinds above the trim. I've added some backing above the trim on my other windows, and I'm going to do that on this window. But this is a lot stronger. Additionally, when I retract my shades, you know, the blinds are going to be able to get much higher, so I think it's going to be a much cleaner look. So without further ado, I'm going to show you the piece of plywood that I have cut out, and we'll get to installation here. You know, actually, before we get to that wood backing, I would like to discuss how I sized my blinds for my window. Now, again, the blinds I ordered, 2.5-inch wood Faux blinds, manufactured by Bali, purchased through Lowe's. Before you purchase blinds, please go through the manufacturer's website and follow their sizing chart to ensure that everything is sized correctly for your window. Of course, you're going to have to enter the measurements, but follow their directions. As for my window, Bali blinds. For the wood Faux blinds, they recommend that you have 1 inch of overhang on either side of your trim. And the reason for that is to help reduce the amount of light that bleeds through, but also to help increase your privacy levels. So that's exactly what I did. I basically added 1 inch on either side of the trim. When you're doing this measurement, you're supposed to measure the trim in 3 places, bottom, middle, and top. Take your widest measurement, I believe it was 28 3/4, added 2 inches. So my total width for my blinds are 30 3/4. Now, as for the height, you're going to have to kind of figure out what you want to do, how far you want the blinds to go down. Basically, what I wanted the blinds to rest on the bottom of the windowsill right here. Now, for Bali blinds, they want you to measure from where you want your blinds to stop to the top of the headrail. Now the headrail is where that winding mechanism sits, and that headrail I've measured it's about 2¼ inches. But I would recommend that you add a couple inches just to give you a little bit of leeway. You know, I'd much rather have my blinds a little bit too long, you know, have two louvers sitting on top of one another as opposed to the blinds being too short. So let's kind of put this into motion. Again, I want my blinds to stop on my windowsill. The headrail is about 2¼ inches. So let's take a measurement from here to the top of my trim. Windowsill to the top of my trim. It's about 55. And that headrail is about 2¼ inches. So, you know, if we were to be exact, that would be 57¼ But you got to add a little bit of room, a little bit of wiggle room. So my total measurement was 59 inches. And I'd imagine on the very bottom of the sill, there's going to be a louver or two that are, you know, resting on one another. I'm completely fine with that, but that's just kind of what's been going through my mind. So we'll see how this works out. I think it's going to work out good though. Now, as for the proposed headrail location, basically the bottom of my headrail, I'm planning to have that sit on the top of the trim. But of course, you know, we have our backing brackets, but you know, the bottom of the headrail is going to sit right about here. So here's where things start to get a bit complicated. Mind you, we are doing outside mount blinds. We're not mounting directly onto the casing. We are mounting directly onto the wall. Now we have to take the thickness of the trim into consideration here. The thickness of this trim, you know, it sits about 5/8 proud of the drywall. So when you're ordering your blinds, they give you the option of ordering something called projection brackets, which projection brackets basically bring or allow you to bring the headrail off the wall to clear things such as trim. It's very confusing as to how to properly order the projection brackets, so I ended up declining with the ordering of the projection brackets. I just said, no, I'll just take them how they come and I'll figure things out on my own. And that's exactly what I did. So I think if I were to order projection brackets, I probably should have ordered the short ones. But again, I just didn't order projection brackets. So what I did, you know, this trim, again, is 5/8 proud of the drywall. I utilized 3/4 inch plywood, and I basically made these backing plates which fasten right above the top of the trim. So now that I've kind of explained to you what's going on in my mind about these projection brackets, let's talk about this 3/4 inch plywood, how I sized that. So here I have the blind that I plan to install in that window. I also have the piece of 3/4 inch plywood that I already cut out that I'm going to install above the trim. Just to give you a quick measurement, the height of the headrail is actually 2 inches. I believe I said 2¼ inches earlier. But basically, for a smaller width window, we're not going to have a center support bracket. What we're going to have are two receiving brackets. But basically, to get the measurement of my backing, I installed these over the ends of the headrail. And I took a measurement from end to end with the brackets installed on the headrail, 30 7/8. So then I just took my piece of plywood, should be about 2 inches by 30 7/8, which is a little bit bigger, 30 7/8 on the money. And something else I did with my plywood, I actually cut a little 45-degree bevel on this corner because where that trim meets the drywall, you know, the trim on top of the window, there's normally a bead of caulk, a bead of silicone up there. So this bevel accounts for that caulk and will allow this to sit flat against the wall, which that's a really important little touch there. Also, if the height of the headrail is only 2 inches, why did I make this 2 3/8? It was just going through my mind. The reason I did that was because the height of the mounting brackets here are 2 3/8. So, you know, this plywood is basically the same height as the mounting brackets. So in terms of installation, after we get this piece of plywood backing up there, it should be extremely easy to install these because all we should have to do is pretty much line this up on the end of the plywood, pre-drill some holes, fasten this in, and then we should be able to slide the blinds right in. It should make the installation process really easy. It's just a lot of prep work. Now, we know that this overhangs the edge of the trim 1 inch. So to make things real easy when I go on top of the window to fasten this to the wall, I'm just going to make a 1 inch mark on either side of this backing, and that'll make it really easy to line everything up. So basically this 1 inch line should line up right on the outside edge of the trim. Alright, and now the fun begins. So we have our piece of plywood backing. You can see the beveled edge. And right, there'd be a bead of caulk back here, hopefully, help prevent air leaks. But we're just gonna line up our two 1-inch marks, right, because we have an inch of overhang. So I'm just trying to keep the space even on either side. Next thing I need to do is ensure that this piece of plywood backing is level. And that's important because if I'm going to just fasten my receiving brackets for the headrail right on the ends of the plywood, if this isn't level, then the blinds are going to be slanted, and I don't want that. So I see that this side is a little bit low, so I have a couple shims, and I'm just going to shim it until it is level. Now that that is level, I'm going to check that on either side of the window the stick out is even. An 1 1/16. Looks good. Next, I'm going to take my drill with a countersunk bit. I'm going to pre-drill 3 holes, one here, and one here. 2.5-inch long fasteners. I'm going to start with the middle one. Check my level, and then I'll go to the sides. All 3 fasteners are countersunk, and I'm going to take some caulk and fill in this gap. Now, if you decide to do the plywood backing like I've done here, question is, do you need to paint this? I'm not 100% sure. I needed to touch up my casings anyway because you can see where the old holes were from the old window treatments, but I'm going to paint these regardless, as well as the rest of my window casing. For that, I'm just going to tape up the ends, and then I'm going to freehand the rest. If you have a good edging brush and a steady hand, you really can do the job much quicker than taping everything. But that is a question I'll try and answer later on in the video. Is any of this visible? I don't think it will be, but we will find out. Alright, receiving bracket. So I'm just going to hold this onto the end of my backing, ensuring that the outside is flush. If anything, you want this receiving bracket a little bit proud of the backing to allow a little bit of movement because I cut these to the exact dimensions. But this bottom lip right here, it's going to be on the same plane as the bottom of the plywood backing, just ensuring that this is plumb as well. So I like where that is. I'm going to hold it on here with one finger and then scribe out the holes with a mechanical pencil. Another thing I want to mention, on this bracket, this receiving bracket, there's 2 oval slots and there's 2 circular slots. Now, the hardware they give you, they only give you 2 fasteners for each bracket. Now, my method of installation, I like to attach the fasteners in the slotted holes. Reason being, I'll secure this on here, and then I will do the same thing on the other side, put both of these receiving brackets in, install the blinds, and I'll check that headrail for level. If it's at a level, if you utilize these slots, then you could loosen up the fasteners and lower or raise one side to ensure that your headrail is perfectly level. So I'm going to pre-drill all 4 holes now, and then I'm going to drive my fasteners in slowly to ensure I don't split my plywood. And then we will install the bracket, but also we got to make sure we install that spacer bracket because we have 2.5-inch slat blinds. According to the instructions, I believe if you have just 2-inch slat blinds, you don't need to install that spacer, but because I have 2.5, I got to use that spacer. Even though I pre-drilled all 4 holes, I still like to take my fastener and tap the holes. Just makes installation of the bracket a little bit easier and a little bit more controlled. A question you may have is, if they only included 2 fasteners, why did you pre-drill the 2 circular holes? Well, the main holding fasteners, again, I'm going to install those in the oval holes. The reason I pre-drilled the 2 circular holes is after I test fit everything, ensure that that headrail is level, I'll come back with a small 3/4-inch coarse thread drywall fastener, and I'll install 1 or 2 of these into the round holes just to lock everything in place and prevent it from falling or sagging over time. Now here's that little spacer bracket I was talking about. So this is just going to go in between the bracket and my backing. And again, I'm going in the oval slots. Alright, I'm liking where this bracket is positioned. I'll do the same thing on the other side, and then we'll do a test fit with the head rail. Now that we have both of those brackets installed, let's install the blinds, check it for level, and we'll remove it. If we need to make an adjustment, we could slide one of these brackets up or down. And this is perfectly level. So I'm going to remove the blinds once more, and I'm going to add that coarse drywall fastener to one of the circular holes on both of the brackets. At least one per bracket. Because I added that coarse drywall fastener in the circular hole on each bracket, these brackets are never going to shift up or down now, so this is locked in. Next, let's reinstall the blind for the final time. So we're going to slide the head rail into these receiving brackets. And then really important, we're going to fold over the end of the brackets, and you have to push in. Be careful, this is sharp, but you should hear a distinct click when it locks in, like that. Same thing on this side. There we go. So now it's time to install the clips for the valance. Now when you clip these on, it's important that you clip these on a section of the rail as to where it doesn't interfere with any of the inner mechanisms. So I'm gonna find a suitable location, and I'm gonna film this on my cell phone, and then I'll show you that video. See, we have all the mechanisms right here. We don't want this clip to interfere with that, so I'm gonna elect to position my clip in between this support right here and these gears. So we're just simply gonna push this down, let it snap right in. We'll do the same thing on the other side here. Find a suitable location. Right here we have a bit of a void. Just line it up, snap it in. And the number of these you need are going to depend on the length of your head rail. So check in the installation manual. It'll tell you how many clips you need for each head rail. In this case, because this one is fairly short, we only need 2. Now time to install the valance onto the clips. So first you want to get everything lined up, have the same overhang on either side. My situation's a bit complicated because I have a second blind over here towards the right, and the return, the typical return where it makes a right angle and goes back to the wall, isn't going to work. So I'm going to have to recut this angle and probably cope my return piece into the other valance on this other larger blind. So I'll show you what that looks like when it's all done. But just for installing the main valance, you're going to have these 2 receiving clips. Right, they're gonna be flared. So what you're gonna do, you're gonna start these in the rail. Right, there's a slot right here, so you're gonna turn these, and once you turn them into the rail, it'll lock it in place. I actually have this upside down, so you would, again, position it in the rail, turn it, lock it in place, kind of see how that flare is pointing up. So then you would just push it up on the bracket, and then the bracket prevents it from falling back down. If you do need to remove this, you could just continue to push it up and out of the bracket. So I'm going to try and get this lined up and just get it into position to show you what it looks like. Just to show you again, you have this rail. Right here are your receiving clips. One end is flared. Flared end is going to face up. So you would just line this little knob in the rail, rotate 90 degrees, and then it's locked in. If you need to shift it, no big deal. Turn, and you can move it down wherever you need to. I scored that up a little bit, but nobody's ever going to see that. No big deal. All right, so let's line this up. Slide it on. And then the cool thing about this, if for some reason, your head rail's out of level, or you want to give your blinds a certain look, you can control how high or low you want this valance to sit. So it's completely up to you, and again, if you need to take it off, just continue pushing it up, and it'll come right up and out. So I'll put it back on, and then I'll show you how to cut the returns if you didn't order them to size, which I didn't order my returns to size because I was having a hell of a time trying to figure that out with the extension brackets. Like, I contacted the manufacturer. If you order extension brackets, does it increase the length of your returns? They said yes, but they didn't really specify how much. So again, I did no extension brackets, and I chose to get custom extra long returns which I suggest going that way because then you just cut them to size and you know that they're going to be perfect. Here's my balance return. As you can see, it's too long. We need to cut this to size. I did this intentionally because I wanted to cut them to size to ensure we got a real nice tight fit. So how do you measure how much you got to cut off the back? Well, here's my method. If we look at this wide portion right here, I basically take a measurement from here to the tip of the return valance. And this measurement from here to here is how much I need to cut off the end. So I'm measuring 1 1/4. So we're on the square end now. There's 1 1/4. So let's take this to our miter saw. We'll scribe a line, we'll cut this, and then we'll try and fit it on. All right, let's check our fit. That is pretty perfect. See, the edges are a little bit chopped up. That's just how it came from the factory. Nobody's ever really going to notice. But how do you attach the return to the main balance? Well, they have these little 90-degree angle brackets, so you simply slide this into the rail, push it in, and there's the same slot on the main valance. So we're just going to line this up, slide it in, and push. And that's all there is to it. If I'm being hypercritical, probably could use just a little bit of caulk. I'm having a little bit of trouble getting it to close up all the way, but that's just how it is. It's not a perfect world. So here's an issue I'm running into. On the right side, I'm not able to do the typical return back to the wall. I had to get creative because I have this other blind. Thankfully, there's enough clearance for it to sit here, but I want to clean this up. You know, on the longer blind, I could return this back to the wall, but there'd really be no point. I could just leave this, but this bothers me. So an option, I could use this 45-degree cut and make a 90 in here and return it back to this other valance, whatever you want to call it. But you see that angle would be quite steep, and I don't think that would look very nice. So here's what I'm thinking I'm gonna do. I'm gonna recut this angle. You know, currently it's at a 45, but I'm gonna change that to 22.5. So we're gonna have a 22.5 here. And then my other return piece, I'm gonna cut this at 22.5. So as opposed to this being a 90-degree return into the other valance, it's gonna be a 45-degree. So, you know, there's gonna be a little turn, but it's gonna be a bit more gradual. And now, then how I plan to connect this piece to this other head rail right here, well, I think I'm gonna cope it. We'll just cope it right in. I'm not sure how this plastic stuff's gonna do. I've coped plenty of trim before, never the plastic stuff, always the wood, but I think that's gonna give us the cleanest look. This is gonna take some time, but I'll check back in with you once I get it all squared away. And here we have the finished product. These joints were definitely challenging for the coping. I found that using a Dremel with the included drill bit was the best option, and it worked out just fine. There was originally a little bit more overhang, and I cut that off, so I mean, it's as clean as it's gonna look. I gotta say, I'm pretty darn pleased with how that turned out.